Welcome to another PureRead audiobook. It's wonderful to have you with us. Before we get started, please like and subscribe to our channel and share it with friends. Supporting us in this simple and easy way ensures we can continue adding more delightful audiobooks for your listening enjoyment. The following story is copyrighted PureRead Limited, the home of books you can trust. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy. Love's Promise, an Amish Romance by Grace Given. Chapter 1, An Unexpected Visitor. Rebekah Stauffer prayed early in the morning for strength to meet another day on her own. She ran her fingers over the railing of the bed Eli carved for their son. Samuel's face emitted a peace she only recently discovered again within her own being. Rebekah had accepted Eli was in heaven with their gut, and she could no longer pine for him. This was harder to do on some days than others. She thanked her God for the support of her family and her community. Most of all, she thought about how generous Jacob Byler had been in keeping up the farm. Jacob promised Eli he would take care of Rebekah and Samuel. Eli whispered this wish to his best friend before taking his last breath. "I am coming, Samuel," said Rebekah. She was thankful her son awoke each day with a smile on his face. Just as she picked him up, she heard a knock on the door. She did not expect Jacob until later in the morning and was curious who it could be. She saw a male figure through the light, crisp kitchen curtain and hurried to the door. "Mrs. Stauffer, I am Richard Blandon." "I hope I do not disturb you," said the man. She wondered how he knew her name. There was something about the tall, slim man that seemed familiar to Rebekah, but she could not place where she may have seen him before. He was an Englisher, though he reminded her of an Amish man because of his mannerisms toward her. "How may I help you?" asked Rebekah. "I am passing through, and I am looking for a way to earn money so that I may continue my journey. I understand you are a widow. I felt that you could use some help on your farm. My community helps me, and I am sorry, but I have no need to hire anyone," said Rebekah. A slight shiver ran through her body. Never before had she known an Englisher to seek a job in the Amish community. "I am sure there are odd jobs available in town for you to look into." Samuel began to cry, and she glanced back at him now, sitting in his high chair. In his baby talk, he demanded food. "I am sorry," said Rebekah, "but I must go now. I hope you find a job if that is what you want." She breathed deeply when the man turned from her, and she closed the door behind him. She gave Samuel a cracker to keep him happy while she prepared breakfast for both of them. Once the meal was finished and her kitchen cleaned up again, she picked up Samuel and headed toward the barn. He wiggled until she let him down to walk with her. She paced her steps to meet the toddlers. The morning was clear and sunny. Neighbors, along with Jacob, had planted corn in the acreage near the barn. She stopped and shielded her eyes to survey the even rows. Inside the barn, she handed Samuel his small milk pail. He happily stood next to Rebekah while she began to milk the cow. "Be sure and get the pail in the right place," she said. He nodded his head and she squirted milk a few times into his pail and then filled her own from the two cows. Each time one pail filled, Samuel's eyes lit up. Teasing him, Rebekah told him to open his mouth, and she squirted milk between his soft lips. He squealed in delight. When they returned to the kitchen, Rebekah showed him how to pour the milk into jars and set them into the icebox. Lifting Samuel onto a stool by the counter, she grasped his small hands and helped him pour from his pail into a jar of his own. "You are a gut kinner," she said. Her next chore was to clean the house. She pulled the sheets tight on her bed and ran her hand across Eli's side of the bed. Samuel tugged on the blanket, mimicking his mother. "I hear someone coming, Samuel." She hoped the Englisher had not returned and felt relief when she recognized her mother. She and Samuel ran to greet her. Clara Stoltzfus beamed at her daughter and grandson. She knew Rebekah healed more each day, and she hoped her daughter would soon marry again. "I came to help you today," said Claire. She placed an applesauce cake on the table. "Danke, ma'am. I am sure you have plenty to do at your own house," said Rebekah. "First, let us have a cup of cafe." She poured 2 cups for them, and Samuel pointed to the icebox. Rebekah laughed. "He just milked the cow and wants the milk from his own jar," she said. Once they were settled, Clara talked of things she heard in the neighborhood. "I do not want to upset you, but some have seen an Englisher walking back and forth on our road." Clara noticed a look of alarm on her daughter's face. Bishop Daniel and Clara Stoltzfus lived across the pasture from Rebekah. They shared the same road as well as other close neighbors. "He was at my door early this morning," said Rebekah. "What did he want?" Rebekah told her mother of this strange request from the stranger. "I have no idea how he knew my name or how he knew I am widowed. That is most mysterious of all." She went on to tell Clara that during the short conversation, she thought there was something about him that reminded her of their Amish men. "He could have belonged to an Amish community at one time," said her mother. Both women knew that on rare occasions when a young person left for his or her Rumspringa, they chose not to come back home. It was unusual, but it did happen. Rebekah had not thought about that as a possibility. It could explain why he thought an Amish person would hire him. "Maybe he is familiar with our way of life." Rebekah thought it an explanation, but was uncomfortable that the man named Richard Blanton knew so much about her. She decided to change the subject and asked her mother if she wished for another cup of coffee. Claire told her if they kept drinking coffee, they would never get the chores done. Her mother wanted to talk with her daughter about remarrying before the morning was over. She and Rebekah's father, the bishop, did not think it was a good thing for her to remain alone much longer. Now that the stranger knew who Rebekah was concerned Clara. She was surprised when Rebekah brought up the subject of marriage herself. It was almost noon, and they were making roast beef sandwiches for lunch. "I will eat with you since your dad has gone to the next community. He is meeting with 2 preachers there today. Bishop Daniel Stoltzfus was available to surrounding ministers in the Amish communities in the Amish communities. They valued his leadership." Rebekah was more than happy to have company for a meal. She loved having Samuel there, but she became lonely talking to a 2-year-old all the time. She pulled a macaroni salad from the icebox and set a large pitcher of iced tea on the table. Clara placed the sandwiches next to them. They were laden with mayonnaise, pickles, and lettuce. Rebekah grilled a toasted cheese sandwich for Samuel and placed a pickle and chopped bits of roast beef on his plate. She filled his glass with milk. "I have been thinking a lot, ma'am," said Rebekah. "It is difficult living alone. I must finally let Eli go and look for a gut husband again." "I am so happy to hear you say that. There is someone very close to you who would be a very gut husband for you." Clara's eyes twinkled. "He comes every day since Eli died and waits for you patiently." "Are you speaking Jacob?" Clara nodded. "He has spoken with your dad. He has been in love with you since before you married Eli. Can you find love in your heart for him?" Rebekah leaned back. How could she have missed that? Jacob did everything for her. He once told her he promised Eli he would take care of her and Samuel. For the first time, Rebekah wondered if Eli had meant for him to do more. Did he mean he wanted Jacob to marry her and take care of her the rest of her life as husband and father to Samuel? She voiced her thoughts to her mother. I know that Eli whispered something to Jacob before he died. Jacob later told me he asked him to care for me and Samuel. Do you think Eli meant for Jacob to marry me?" Clara smiled. "That is the way Jacob Byler took it all. He has been very patient all these years. He did not resent Eli marrying you. He accepted that you were meant for one another. Now he feels you are nearing the end of your deep grief over Eli's death, and he is ready to marry you." Rebekah looked at her mother and smiled. "I have not thought about Jacob more than a very gut friend. But now that the subject comes up, perhaps I have been in love with him these last few months." They heard a horse and buggy approach the house. Clara smiled to herself when Rebekah spoke with new life in her voice. "It is Jacob. He told me he would be late this morning." Clara gathered her plate and rinsed it from the water pitcher near the sink. "I will leave you two alone. I am sure Jacob will be hungry." Rebekah barely noticed when her mother walked past her and greeted Jacob outside. She remembered to thank her for her help, but Rebekah's eyes were on Jacob Byler. Chapter 2. Hearts warmed in the fire of friendship. There was something different in the way Rebekah looked at Jacob. He did not dare think her eyes danced for him, but, taking a second look, he wondered if it could be true. "Come in, Jacob. Before you start working, I will fill your plate for you." Rebekah turned to hide her flushed face and reached for roast beef from the icebox. When Jacob spoke to Samuel, the child's eyes lit up. She listened while the two bantered with one another. The man talked to the child as if in regard to serious business, and the child jabbered in his baby talk as if he understood. "This looks gut, Rebekah." "Have you eaten already?" said Jacob. "I have done so with my mom. But I will have iced tea with you." She brought applesauce cake for dessert. She could not believe how comforting it was to sit with Jacob as if the three of them belonged together. "I will put Samuel down for his nap and then help you outside," she said. "That is gut. I will move the pile of rocks from the corner of the vegetable garden and dig new ground." "What else are you planning out there?" She told him her plans and then commented on the cornfield. "The corn looks like it has a gut stand on it already. Our spring rains have come at the right time." She stood to wash Samuel's face and took him to his bedroom. She watched as his eyelids fluttered and then closed entirely. When she joined Jacob, she said, "He is out for 2 hours or so." "That will give us plenty of time." A warmth not unlike the spring sunshine enveloped Rebekah as she and Jacob worked together. In the meantime, Richard Blanton stood a short distance away in the thicket that hid him from view. Anger rose up within him as he watched Jacob and Rebekah laughing and talking. He was too far away to hear the words, but he resented Jacob's intrusion. He felt sure that now that Eli was gone from the picture, he would have his chance with the beautiful fair-skinned Amish woman. She needed protection and a man to help raise her son. He tried to overlook the fact that the child strongly resembled his father, Eli. He never forgot how the Amish man had turned his back on friendship during Eli's rumspringa long ago. Eli did not like the language Richard used when it came to describing women. Richard willingly left his Amish roots at age 15. He took his chances and ran from abusive parents. He never looked back. That is, not until Eli told him about the Amish girl he planned to marry when he went back home. That was before they became enemies. Richard was curious about the woman Eli could not talk enough about and found out where she lived. He was livid when the marriage took place. Rebekah was beautiful with her light brown hair and fair complexion. The former Amish man became enamored with her from a distance. The day of Eli's accident was one of the happiest days Richard Blanton experienced. When the car driven by Charles Stenter hit the man on the side of the highway, He hoped the accident would leave Eli incapacitated at the very least. His subsequent death was more than he hoped for. When he read the Amish man had died, Richard knew it was time for him to get to know Rebekah Stauffer personally. He was proficient at hiding in Amish barns. He just had to remember to sneak out early in the mornings. He held his breath on several occasions when Rebekah sensed his presence. He did not like to see fear in her eyes. That was when he decided to come to her door to ask for a job on the farm. When she declined his request, he stung at the shocking rejection. When Jacob Byler arrived, the Englisher seethed with jealousy. He must work harder on a plan to get Rebekah's approval of him very soon. Unknown to Richard, his reality was far from Rebekah's. By late afternoon, Rebekah realized Jacob stayed longer than usual. Chores were done, and they sat on the porch. Samuel played with a ball of twine and a stick in the yard. Rebekah set 2 cups of coffee on the bent wicker table between them. Jacob leaned back in the chair. "Eli built sturdy chairs for this porch," he said. Rebekah smiled. Eli could build anything he wanted. He found this old wicker set in back of his dade's barn. Robert Stauffer did not want it, and so Eli took it. He made it usable again. We have many happy memories of Eli. Remember when we were kinner and the 3 of us and Nancy Yoder found ourselves in trouble more times than not?" said Jacob. They laughed at the memories. "I miss Eli, but each day brings me more peace and acceptance of the loss," said Rebekah. "I now know it is time for me to move forward. I have Samuel to think about. You have yourself to think about too, Rebekah. I hope you know that." Jacob shuffled his feet and repositioned in the chair. "As you know, I promised Eli I would take care of you and Samuel. He knew he would not live, and when he asked me, I knew that request would help me get through the loss of my best friend. Rebekah, I have loved you as much as Eli did long before the 2 of you married." "I did not realize that until Mem mentioned it to me today," said Rebekah. "I have always cherished you as a very gut friend. After my talk with Mayam, I realize my feelings for you go deeper than friendship." They looked at each other. Jacob's heart skipped a beat when he saw her eyes fill with the love he'd waited so long for. "Rebekah, will you consider marrying me?" she nodded. Then Jacob called to Samuel. "Samuel, will you marry me too?" "Jay," said Samuel. He raced after the ball of twine. "Then it is settled. We will all 3 get married," said Jacob. "What about Nancy?" said Rebekah. "She can marry us too," said Jacob. He knew Rebekah teased him, and he knew how to tease her back. "You know Nancy Yoder has been in love with you since childhood. We will have to give her the disappointing news," said Rebekah. "Of course, she should not be too down over it all. She gave up on you, and as you know, she and Isaac Schrock plan to marry in the late fall. The whole community is aware of that news. They will make a very gut couple." Jacob looked up into the sky. The sun was sinking on the horizon. "Come on, you and Samuel get into my buggy. We will go and speak with your dade. He can announce our engagement at the next service." Rebekah hopped up and took the cups into the kitchen. Jacob scooped up Samuel, and they were on their way to Bishop Daniel and Clara Stoltzfus's home. Clara saw the buggy coming down the lane and quickly placed more plates on the table. "It looks like we will have 3 guests for supper tonight," said Claire. Daniel looked out the window to see his daughter laughing as she jumped from the buckboard without waiting for Jacob to assist her. Jacob swung Samuel into his arms, and they were soon at the kitchen door. "Come in," said Daniel. "You are just in time for supper." Rebekah and Jacob looked at each other. "We forgot it was supper time," said Rebekah, "but we will eat with you and give you our gut news." Clara and Rebekah spread out the roast chicken. potato salad, pickled beets, mashed potatoes, and a fresh loaf of bread on the table. They poured drinks and all sat down. Daniel bowed his head and prayed a prayer of praise and thanks to God. He was somewhat distracted at the underlying excitement between his daughter and Jacob. Clara had told him of her conversation with their daughter. God answered prayers during and after storms of life, he thought. It was hard to eat and talk at the same time, but Rebekah and Jacob managed to give the good news to her parents. Everyone expressed their happiness, and Samuel giggled in between times, like the grown-ups. After the meal was finished, an apple cake eaten, Rebekah looked at Jacob. "Do we have time to ride to the Stauffers and let them know our news?" she asked. "Of course we do," said Jacob. "We must let them know." Jacob had told the Stauffers of their son's dying wish a few weeks after his best friend died. At the time, Ruby and Robert discussed in private their hope that their son's close friend would one day marry Rebekah. Ruby told her husband Jacob was the only man she would fully trust to raise their grandchild the way Eli would want him to be raised. They had no reservations about Rebekah's news when the three arrived around 7 that night. Ruby hugged her daughter-in-law tightly. "We are so happy for you. This is the best thing Eli could have ever hoped for. You have come through much sadness in your life and have remained steadfast in your faith. Now God is giving you a new life again. It is time that you move forward according to His plan. Let us bow our heads and say a prayer of praise to our God," said Robert. They bowed their heads and Robert prayed. When they lifted up, Robert said, "Come in and join us for our evening prayers." Eli's siblings sparkled with happiness at the news, and all bowed their heads as Robert picked up his Bible. Rebekah reveled in the joy of once again joining a united family in prayer. On the buggy ride home, she cradled the sleeping Samuel in her arms and leaned her head against Jacob's shoulder. They rode in silence, each in thoughts of their own. Her heart once again overflowed with happiness. Chapter 3. Rebekah's Admirer. The next day, Rebekah sang a melody from childhood as she worked at cleaning out the root cellar. She knew how fast the seasons moved along, and her garden would soon produce the first vegetables of her labors. The corn grew tall, and deep green stalks promised abundance. She looked forward to preserving the food for the winter season. Corn would be harvested, while tender for her use, and the rest left for feed for her small herd of animals. She was lost in thought when she felt, rather than noticed, the shadow at the root cellar door. She looked up to see Richard Blanton. Samuel was sleeping his morning nap, and everything was quiet around her. She drew a deep breath and started for the door. She did not want to speak with the man inside the cellar. She grew cold when he took her hand and assisted her up the steps to the yard. She did not thank him, as was her custom. She wished Jacob would appear, but knew he was helping his own dade for the morning. "It is a beautiful day," said Richard. "I hoped we might have time for a visit. What can I do for you?" Rebekah did not look him in the eye, and so she missed the gleam that would have unsettled her further. "Perhaps we can sit on the bench or by the garden." Richard looked around the farm. Everything was pristine in appearance. Rebekah took great care of her land. He dismissed the fact that she did not do it all alone. "I can spare a few minutes, but I have chores to do," said Rebekah. When they sat down, she felt the Englisher far too close to her and shifted a few inches from him. She picked up the scent of shaving lotion Englishers used. When she went into the general store in town, she always knew when someone from the outside world was nearby. She preferred the clean smell of homemade soaps and shampoos she was taught to make and use. "What do you want?" she asked. "I want to get to know you better. I thought if I could help you on your farm, we would have a better chance to do that." She gasped audibly. This was the last thing she expected from him. She stood quickly. "I'm engaged to be married. There can be no other for me than Jacob Byler. Please leave now and, Mr. Blanton, do not come back again." Silently, Rebekah prayed someone would come up the lane. Richard looked at her and stood as well. "This is not the end of it. I can give you so much more than Jacob Byler can ever do." Fear crossed her eyes. He softened his voice. "I will give you as much time as you need. In the meantime, I will do chores here for you that will cost you nothing." His voice was confident. "I have told you to leave, and I have told you I have no need of your services here." Prayer words she learned as a child raced through her mind. Her legs threatened to buckle underneath her as she turned toward the house. His knowing chuckle behind her sent shivers through her body, and she feared he meant to follow her inside. Instead, he continued to laugh as he walked away. For the rest of the day, Rebekah prayed for restoration of calm and concentrated on Samuel. She allowed him to pat the cookie dough flat with his small hands and relished in his innocent laughter. In spite of her resolve, she found herself looking through the kitchen window, hoping Richard Blanton was long gone and that Jacob was on his way. She knew the Englisher was menacing and dangerous. She did not think it would be the last she saw of him. She wanted to start across the pasture toward her parents' home, but feared Richard Blanton would suddenly spring from nowhere and accost her. Rebekah knew she would not feel comfortable in another part of the house with the doors unlocked. She and Eli did not lock doors, though he had made deadbolt slides in case they were ever needed. To this day, they had remained unused. She slid the bolt across the kitchen door and breathed deeply. She did the same on the front door, and then she sat down to complete a sewing project. "Look, Samuel, you will have a shirt ready for summer." The toddler gurgled in appreciation. Rebekah stood up and pulled the toy wooden horse down from the shelf for Samuel. She sewed with contentment as she listened to the clop of the toy as her son played with it. Lost in thoughts, she did not realize Samuel nodded. It was the middle of the afternoon and time had gotten away for her. She picked him up and carried him to his bed. This gift of her son was the best one Eli had ever given her, and she was grateful for him. She stood over the bed and looked down at her child. Her reverie was broken when she heard her mother's voice through the locked door. Rebekah hurried to the kitchen and unbolted the door. "Was the door stuck?" asked Clara. "I will have your dad come over and fix it for you." Tears filled Rebekah's eyes, and she sat down at the kitchen table quickly. Her head rested with her hands propped on her forehead. "Doctor, what is it? Has something happened?" Clara's thoughts raced to her grandson. "Is Samuel all right?" She reached for the coffee pot and filled it with water. Then she set it on the wood-burning stove and lit the fire. She sat down with her daughter and lifted her face between her hands. "My mom, I have had a very bad experience today." Rebekah told her mother of Richard Blanton's visit. "I will not feel comfortable again working alone outside." "We must pray, Rebekah. You cannot allow this man to frighten you. You have a community around you who will take care of this situation." Claire bowed her head and prayed aloud. Peace once again enveloped Rebekah. "Now," said her mother, "when Samuel awakens from his nap, we will have cookies with him. I see he helped you today." They both laughed at the misshapen cookies on the plate on the counter. "Jay, he likes to help, no matter what I am doing." "You are doing a gut job with him, Rebekah," said Clara. "He is a happy child like his dad. Remember how easy going Eli was." It seemed nothing upset him that could not be solved. Rebekah knew her mother was right. Eli would not allow an Englisher to upset him like Richard Blanton upset her. She pushed aside thoughts of what if, when it came to Eli's support and protection, she wished she and Jacob were married and then his time would be spent with her every day and night. Her mother sensed her thoughts. God does not want us to live a life of fear. This problem will be resolved. I will speak with your dad. The elders will decide how best to handle this situation. Rebekah hugged her mother. You are right, but I do feel safer with my doors locked when I'm alone. That is all right, but do not feel alarm when doing chores outside that need to be done. We cannot live that way. It is a sign of lack of faith in God's protection over us. When Claire left, Rebekah hummed a favorite hymn and began preparation of supper for her and Samuel. Jacob promised he would be by to milk the cows for her and do evening chores. She set an extra plate on the table for him. It will be better when we are all three at this table for every meal, my son, said Rebekah. Samuel looked up and smiled in agreement. Rebekah slid the lock open when she saw Jacob arrive. He looped the horse's reins over the post and went to the pump near the back door. She heard the water splashing and handed him a towel when he came inside. He asked how her day had gone. She told him it was good. She decided to enjoy the meal first, and then she would tell Jacob the events of her day. She knew that the elders had the word by now. She expected a visit from them the next morning. Rebekah was well aware that her father, the bishop, moved fast on issues that threatened any of his members. She was no exception. I spoke with your dad earlier this morning, said Jacob. Rebekah knew it was before breakfast that day since Jacob had early duties with his own father. It was also before Richard Blanton appeared at the cellar door. He agrees that you and I do not have to wait until late fall to marry. He told me we can set our own date, and he will notify preachers from the nearby community to wed us. Rebekah's heart leapt at the news. That is gut, Jacob. We will decide tonight, but I know it must be a time when things are not so busy. Spring will soon end and summer will be here. I have thought about that, too. I looked at the corn and alfalfa fields. They are doing well, and other than usual daily chores, there is nothing to stop us from marrying very soon. He smiled, and the love between them kept even Samuel from their thoughts. How does it sound if we wed 2 or 3 weeks from now? I am ready whenever you are. I cannot wait to have a family together again, Jacob. God has blessed me so much when He brought you into my life long ago. It is all in His plan for us. Jacob agreed. He calculated work to be done. They must consider their neighbors and their responsibilities as well. Everyone would be pleased to have an early break for a celebration. He and Rebekah decided on the date 2 weeks away. Chapter 4. Watching. That evening, Rebekah and Jacob were happy with their decision. Rebekah was reluctant to tell Jacob of her day. She did not want to spoil their happiness. On the other hand, she knew the elders were probably meeting as they talked and would be at her house the next morning. Jacob noticed her forehead wrinkling. Her eyes were downcast, and he reached for her hand. "What is it, Rebekah?" he asked. "I know you still miss Eli, but I will do everything to make you happy. I will be a gut dad to Samuel, and he will be as my own." Her head jerked up. "Oh, no, Jacob, that is not it at all. When I told you my day was gut, I did not tell you the whole truth. I have been very upset over events." Jacob shifted forward quickly. "You can tell me anything, Rebekah." She told him of the unwelcomed visit from the Englisher Richard Blanton. No details were left out. She was alarmed at the look on Jacob's face and reassured him that the elders were making a decision as to how to handle the incident. "I am sure they will know best how to take care of the matter, Rebekah," said Jacob, "but you cannot stay here alone with the man hiding in the shadows. I will stay here and sleep on the couch tonight until the matter is solved." Rebekah felt very grateful for his offer. But she did not want her community to think Jacob was being inappropriate with her before their marriage. She finally convinced him that she would lock her doors that night after he left. "I will be fine." Eli made sturdy slide locks, but until now I have never felt the need to use them. I will sleep well knowing God is protecting me. Jacob reluctantly agreed and knew she was right. Neither of them wanted rumors to spread against them. He told Rebekah he would milk the cows and make sure enough water was in the troughs for her animals, and then go on home. With determination, Jacob walked to the barn. He searched the area in the early moonlight for anyone who did not belong there. When the chores were finished, he let Rebekah know he was leaving. He helped her strain the milk first and then place it in the icebox. "I will be back in the early morning, Rebekah. Wait until I get here before you go to the barn." When she closed the door behind Jacob, Rebekah breathed a sigh of relief. After tomorrow, she would not have to worry about her safety. The elders would have an answer. In 2 short weeks, Jacob would live with her as her husband, and his strength would reassure her. Richard Blanton watched as Jacob arrived at Rebekah's house that evening. After an hour of waiting, he grew wary and walked toward town, where he had booked a room at an Englisher's Run. Down hostel, his finances dwindled faster than he expected. Once he married Rebekah Stauffer, money would no longer pose a problem for him. He wasn't all that eager to take on a child in the package, but if he had to come along for him to get Rebekah, he must accept the boy, too. He had kept watch on her activities most of the day. She had not left, and that told him no one knew about his visit. He did not stay long enough to notice Jacob Byler arriving and later scanning the premises. Jacob was a stronger man in appearance than Richard. The Englisher knew the Amish were more suited to settling issues without violence, but in this case he did not know how far Jacob would go to protect Rebekah. His father had paid no attention to the nonviolence code of the Amish way of life. Maybe Jacob Byler had the same mindset. That night, Richard Blanton slept fitfully on the lumpy mattress. His thoughts returned to the cleanliness and comfort of a well-kept Amish home. Jacob could not shake concerns for Rebekah's safety from his mind. He hurried through his morning chores earlier than usual and left for the Stauffer farm. The sun edged upward, but darkness hung enough to cause the landscape to appear shadowed where the ground dipped gently in places. He noted candlelight in Rebekah's kitchen. She greeted him when he came to the door. She had been watching for him and handed him a cup of hot coffee. They sat down and talked of the chores needed for the day. Both knew words of caution were not needed. Jacob and Rebekah would breathe easier when the elders arrived around 8. "I will get your milking done now," said Jacob. "I came early so we will both be available when the bishop and the elders arrive." After he left for the barn, Rebekah began to prepare breakfast for them. Samuel stirred in his bed, and she took care of him. She talked to him and sang a song as she began her day. He tried to join in song from his high chair, and again Rebekah breathed a prayer of thanks that he was a happy child. She saw Jacob coming from the barn with 2 large pails of milk and announced his arrival to Samuel. Once they settled at the table laden with bacon, eggs, fresh biscuits, and gravy, Jacob bowed his head and praised God for his goodness. Rebekah poured more coffee, and soon plates were empty. Jacob carried a few items to her counter where she began washing the dishes. She had made a pear cake the afternoon before to serve the bishop and elders. Jacob returned to the barn to fill water troughs for the animals. He pitched hay down from the loft and scattered a little of it into the feeding bins. The 2 horses were in the pasture, and the cows had been let out as well. This extra hay would be there to feed the animals that night. He then checked the water supply for the chickens and several geese. Rebekah and Samuel joined him. He showed the little boy how to do minor chores while Rebekah gathered eggs. They stopped when they heard several buggies arriving. Jacob picked up Samuel, and the 3 of them went to greet the group. Bishop Daniel Stoltzfus alighted first and smiled at his grandson. Then he looked at Jacob. "We want you to listen to what we say, Jacob. You are involved in this as well," he said. Rebekah gave Samuel his toys, and he played in his bedroom with the favorite wooden horse. Then she offered cake and coffee to her guests. They settled around the large table, and her dad began with a prayer, and then he spoke. "We have spoken with one another in regard to the Englishman who is bothering you, Rebekah. As you know, we are a peaceful community. Violence of any kind, whether spoken, threatening, or of actions, must be met with forgiveness." He paused as he noticed alarm in his daughter's face. "Elder Stanton and Elder King have agreed to speak with the man and ask him to leave your premises. He has no right to be on your property. We feel reasoning with him will be enough to cause him to leave. You must pray for the Englisher and forgive him in your heart." The bishop and elders had spoken. Rebekah accepted their plan. Jacob hid doubts that the man would leave so easily. He vowed to remain on alert. After everyone left, Rebekah regained her peace. Jacob kept things to himself. The days that followed were busy. Rebekah's best friend came to see her a week before the wedding. "I am so happy for you and Jacob, Rebekah," said Nancy. "I know he is the one for you, and not for me. Isaac and I will be married in a few months, and maybe we will have bopless who will grow up together like you, Eli and Jacob and me." "I hope they do not get into as much trouble as the 4 of us did," said Rebekah. Nancy laughed. "We must not hope for that kind of friendships." It had been decided Rebekah and Jacob would wed in the home of Martha King. Martha, the older sister of Isaac, had married a year previous to Elder King's son Abram. She was excited to host the couple's big day. The young people were close friends, and preparations for the wedding day were well underway. Rebekah had not seen or heard from the Englisher and soon forgot about him. The talk the elders had with him must have sent him away for good, she thought. Chapter 5. Protector. The day before Rebekah's and Jacob's wedding, her mother came to visit her daughter. Clara found her baking several loaves of bread. She and Rebekah would spend the rest of the morning preparing for the marriage day. Then they would go to Clara's and continue to cook food to be served. Clara and Daniel, as was usual, custom had not attended the actual marriage ceremony of their daughter when she married Eli. This time would be different. They used the excuse to take care of Samuel during the church service and ceremony. While the women were busy in the kitchen, the young men of the community gathered tables and began moving furniture in Rebekah's sitting room. After the services at the King house, everyone would return to the bride's home for the large dinner. Chairs would have to be brought from the King home, used for the services, and quickly placed around tables inside and outside the home. Though no chores were neglected, there was an air of excitement in the rolling hills that caused everyone to finish as quickly as possible. "I sewed this blue dress for your wedding," said Claire to her daughter. She hoped by sewing a new one for her that Rebekah would take it as a truly new beginning. "I hope you don't mind. I know it is the bride who usually sews her own dress, and you are a much better seamstress than I am." Rebekah hugged her mother. "I knew you were sewing one for me, so I did not do one for myself." She told Claire her father warned her, though gave her the option to make her own. He was supposed to keep that a secret, said Claire. This dress is finely made, said Rebekah. She fingered the soft cotton material with perfect stitching. Her mother was being modest since she was the one who taught her daughter to become an expert seamstress. The morning of the wedding was warm. Sun broke through early morning clouds, and Rebekah arrived at the King home in time to finish preparations. She then joined Jacob, and the main preacher who would conduct the ceremony took them into a private room. He instructed them on the seriousness of the marriage bond, and asked if either wanted to ask questions of him. After approximately 15 minutes, they returned to the large sitting room lined with chairs in rows. Singing of hymns lasted through many verses, while the three met and continued as they entered. Behind Rebekah and Jacob, Nancy and Martha followed Rebekah. Abram and Isaac walked behind Jacob. Jacob felt a lump in his throat when he thought about Eli, who was absent from his marriage day. He silently thanked his best friend for giving Rebekah to him for care. More hymns followed, and then several sermons were preached by 3 preachers. The main preacher called on several married men to speak about marriage. After 3.5 hours, the marriage was sealed and everyone headed for Rebekah's home, where the women were already ladling out food. There were close to 400 Amish people having arrived from other communities to wish the couple well. "Are you happy?" asked Jacob. He leaned toward his bride at the corner table. "I am very happy, Jacob. I love you deeply." They were interrupted by Nancy and Martha, passing plates of roast turkey, red beet pickles, white potatoes, and gravy, along with numerous other dishes. Inside and outside, everyone enjoyed the abundance before them and talked of the day filled with blessings. Rebekah leaned back. "That was all so very gut, but I'm afraid I ate too much." "I could not resist any of it," said Jacob. "Perhaps you will not have to cook for us for several days." They laughed together as they had done for many years. Abram tapped Jacob on the shoulder. "It is 3:00. Martha led the couple to the next table where a large applesauce cake waited to be cut. Rebekah did so and sent pieces first to close friends who sat at various tables. Then she finished cutting the cake, which was distributed to the other guests. The wedding cake added to an array of desserts, and no one was without sweets. Singing began again and continued until the younger members headed for the barn. The older members headed for the barn. The older members followed the custom of taking care of all the work and left the fun to their children. There they played party games, and once again, it was time to eat. For supper, leftovers had been prepared as if new dishes. "It looks like you will get an entire free week of cooking," said Jacob to his wife. "I doubt that will happen," said Rebekah. Clara caught her daughter before she joined the others in the barn. "We will take Samuel with us for a few days, so you and Jacob can adjust to your new lives together." That night, Rebekah and Jacob enjoyed singing and playing games with the others until the early morning hours. Jacob could not believe how blessed he was when he and Rebekah were finally left alone in her bedroom once shared with Eli. He folded her into his arms, and her heart was overwhelmed with joy at his touch. Richard Blanton had left town for a few weeks after the elders spoke sternly to him. Their forgiveness of his intrusion on Rebekah's life at first touched him. No one in his former family had ever verbally or otherwise expressed forgiveness to him. He wondered if the Amish way of life was as happy and peaceful as it seemed, now that he looked from the outside in on it. Growing up, he only knew discord at home. When he was a child, an elder in the community heard of the abuse, and a committee was sent to the home to counsel his parents. Better days followed, but did not last. His father was especially reluctant to give up his abusive ways toward his family. Richard later found out from a former neighbor on his Rumspringa that his family had been dismembered from the community but still lived in the same house. He never went back to find the truth of the matter, nor did he care to. Richard thought he accepted the admonishment of the elders in Rebekah's community, but when word reached him that there was to be an Amish wedding, the old anger surfaced. He knew it was Rebekah's and Jacob's day to wed and once more found his way to the Stauffer farm. When Elder King and his wife left the wedding, the elder saw the familiar figure at the end of the brush and tree line. He turned the curve and met the eyes of the Englisher. It happened in a split second, and the man disappeared. Elder King left his wife at home and told her he had a serious matter to discuss with Elder Stanton. He reassured his wife when she noted the late hour. "It is of utmost importance." "I will not be long," he said. Richard Blanton kicked the pebbles and sticks beneath his feet. He had no idea what steps the Amish man would take after he saw him. Richard knew the elder recognized him right away. He wondered if his trespassing was serious enough for them to call the police from the nearby town. He couldn't risk that. He was already on the wanted list for stealing food from the grocery in the town. By the time he left, he had very little cash at all. No one would hire him, and before he left, he snatched food from the store and ran. The grocer raced after him, and several joined in the pursuit, but he outran them all. Charges were filed and several cops searched for him to no avail. The day after the wedding, the young couple arose after a short sleep and joined the others to help clean up everything. Young boys arrived and folded tables and chairs. They then loaded them onto open wagons, and they were taken to the shed behind the bishop's parsonage and stored. The rest of the day was spent finishing up chores, and Rebekah worked in her garden. It was early to bed that night, after the tiring events of the past 48 hours. The next morning, Rebekah and Jacob talked of visiting relatives the following weekends. "Eli and I did not get to do that," said Rebekah. "Do you remember how harsh the winter was that followed our late fall wedding?" "Jay, I do remember that." Winter came too quickly after that wedding. "I remember the roads were too dangerous for you to travel during that time." Rebekah recalled how they had decided to wait until a gap between spring and summer to do that. As it turned out, farming and normal chores took over their time, and Eli told her it was not meant to be. Their relatives visited them when time permitted, and each brought belated wedding gifts fit for a couple just starting out. "It is gut. We will not have to worry about icy roads," said Jacob. They planned their visits and looked forward to their travels. Clara and Daniel were all too happy to keep Samuel on weekends for them. "Your mom is happy to use any excuse to have Samuel near her and the bishop." Rebekah laughed and agreed. They both realized they would have to work long days during the week to make up for weekends away from home. The next weekend found the couple at Jacob's aunt and uncle's home in a nearby Amish community. His aunt had not been well enough to come for the wedding. They spent Friday night with them and enjoyed breakfast the next morning, before leaving for the next relative's home to have the noon meal and spend the afternoon with them. "We will have supper at your cousin's home next," said Jacob. Saturday night was spent 7 miles from their home. They enjoyed Sunday breakfast and attended their services together. From there, they started for home, but not before seeing another relative Sunday night. At each home, the couple pitched in with chores and enjoyed more good food. By the time they arrived home late Sunday night, both of them carried in gifts of canned goods, a new coffee pot, and various other household items. In the morning, they returned to their own work and did it all over again the following few weekends. Clara returned Samuel every Monday and picked him up again Friday mornings. Rebekah and Jacob relished their new life together. Jacob shared plans with Rebekah how to extend the farmland. Together, they built the beginnings of their new lives. Chapter 6. A Happy Home. Richard Blanton finally realized the Amish were not going to turn him in to the police. He began to realize as well that he would never have Rebekah Byler for his own. He watched a few more times from his hiding place and could see she was happy with Jacob and she had nothing in her heart for him. Saddest of all for him was that he would never find that kind of happiness. He knew even if he ever became a father, he had no skills for parenthood. Perhaps there was hope for him if he observed Jacob more in his interactions with Rebekah's child. He knew the elders and the bishop were on the lookout for him every time they neared Rebekah's home. He managed to stay hidden. The day came when he awakened. "I am wasting my life," he muttered. "It is time to move on." He was stumped as to where he would go. He had no home and no friends. He was adept at running them all away by his words or actions, whichever came first. He recalled Eli. Eli was a friend until Richard spoke disparagingly of women. Eli had no patience for talk against women. It suddenly dawned on Richard that if he wanted to marry and have his own family, he must heed Eli's advice and respect women first. The only place he knew to learn how to do that was in books at the library in town. In Richard's mind, he had only to read books, and he would have the key. He did not dare go into the local town in case he was noticed. The police would be on him again. Instead, he arrived at the blacktop road where he hitchhiked to the next town, one after another, until he reached a large city where he could lose himself easily. Several months passed since the Byler wedding. One day, the bishop met with the elders. They discussed progress on issues solved and matters at hand. "I do not believe the Englisher who bothered Rebekah is here any longer. It has been quite a while since the elders have seen him around," said the bishop. "We will move on to other matters." Rebekah's heart filled with gratefulness as she watched Samuel follow Jacob every waking moment. He learned fast and was now 3 years old. He would soon have a new sister or brother. They had not told him the news yet, because for Samuel it would mean he would get the new family member today. Rebekah was healthy, and now that fall approached, she was busier than ever with final harvesting of her garden and canning the produce for winter. Jacob finished harvesting the fields, and there was plenty of hay in the loft, and covered bales dotted the pastures. Corn was stacked in the corn crib between the main part of the barn and the loft. They were excited for another wedding soon to be held in the community. Nancy and Isaac were to marry in a week. The wedding would be at the Byler home this time. "It will be a gut break for everyone. We have all worked very hard," said Jacob. "After the wedding, what do you think about building an extra smaller house near our pasture?" asked Rebekah. They had discussed the health of Rebekah's grandparents on her father's side. Rebekah mentioned the idea of building a house for them to live in. The bishop's acreage was too small for another building. Rebekah told her mother and father that the grandparents would be close to all of them. The bishop worried about his parents since they lived quite a distance away. He had no siblings left in this world and wanted them closer. "I think it is a very gut idea. I will gather the community in the next week or so. We can get the house framed easily enough in a few days. Everyone will work on the inside as the days follow. I feel sure we can have them moved in before the worst of winter arrives." "It would be gut if they could be settled by Thanksgiving," said Rebekah. She missed seeing her grandparents as often as she wanted to. This was the perfect solution. Saturday rolled around after a busy week, and she, Jacob, and Samuel bundled up and started early for the nearby community where her grandparents lived. Her grandfather had been a bishop in that community, but his health failed. He could not walk as he once did, and he tired easily. They greeted their granddaughter's family warmly. The Bylers told them of the plans if they agreed. Her grandmother breathed a sigh of relief. She was concerned about their future. The community her husband served for so many years were very supportive, but she felt they needed to be closer to their own family. "Then it is settled," said Jacob. "We will begin soon. First, we have a wedding in our community. The bishop would like for you to come as soon as you can and stay with them until we can get your house built. You will enjoy the wedding of Nancy Yoder and Isaac Schrock. Then your house will be constructed." The older couple was delighted. Their granddaughter promised to come back Monday to help them pack needed items. Then, later, the remainder of their belongings would be packed and brought to their new home. Preparations for their arrival added to the excitement of the upcoming wedding. Community members were more than happy to help their neighbor. More than once, Rebekah appreciated her extended family in her Amish community. Everything settled in in the area. Fields lay dormant with tiny speckles of green coming up in the form of future wheat on various farms. Leaves fell from trees and the winds took them away into the open pastures or stacked them against fence lines. Sarah and John Stoltzfus's home was progressing fast. Everyone helped paint the walls of the four-room house. On the rough oak table in the kitchen was a spread of food for the workers. The table would be sanded down, and the wood painted before the elderly couple moved in. There was a small chicken house and fenced yard for chickens, and Sarah would be able to gather fresh eggs daily. She had a new step when she walked. She felt as if she were a new bride setting up her house for the first time, and smiled to herself at the thought. "What is it that makes you smile?" asked John. "You are happier, too," said Sarah. "We both are blessed to have a caring family and new community. Even your bones are not bothering you as much." The bishop chuckled. "They are bothering me, but I do not seem to notice as much. You are right. It is gut to be close to family again." He clutched the cup handle in his arthritic fingers and steadied it with his other hand. Lifting the steaming coffee to his lips, he said, "We are indeed very blessed." "Tomorrow we will be in our own house again," she said. They appreciated their son's hospitality, and Clara was more than generous in making them feel comfortable, but it was time to be in their own home again. Her husband nodded in agreement. At that moment, he looked across at Rebekah's and Jacob's farm. The new home and back was visible from Clara's kitchen. He called his wife to the window, and they watched as buggies pulled up behind one another and the men began unloading their furniture. Rebekah promised Sarah and John that she and her mother would take them over to the new house and help them arrange things as they wanted them. She had sewn a new layered quilt for their bed. Others had brought small gift items as a welcome, which would be a surprise to the elderly couple. Everyone knew Sarah would not have to prepare food for a few days, since there would be plenty brought in for them. Rebekah added several jars of strawberry preserves, pickled beets, corn, and green beans to the pantry. Clara noticed the shine in her daughter's eyes. The child she carried caused part of her happiness, but the idea of having her grandparents close by added to it. Clara picked up food items and placed them in the basket, while Rebekah warmed the bricks to nestle around her grandparents' feet on the ride over to their new home. When they arrived, everyone waited to welcome them home as they came up the lane. Then the new homeowners were assisted from the buggy and led inside. The pleased look on the faces of Sarah and John was enough for those who worked so hard to get it ready before Thanksgiving arrived. "We will have much to be thankful for this year, and we thank all of you," said John. He turned to his son, who entered. "My son, Bishop Daniel, will ask a blessing over the house and over all of you." They bowed heads as Daniel prayed a long prayer of praise. When he finished, the women began dishing food for everyone. Several tables had been set up, but mainly they stood with plates in hand and ate of the bounty. Sarah sat down in her favorite easy chair and reached for Samuel. He willingly sat on her lap for a few minutes and then ran to explore the house. That night, Rebekah felt comforted when she saw the glow of the lantern in the kitchen of her grandparents' house. Being snuffed out, she did not doubt they would all sleep well knowing they were close by. Chapter 7. Samuel. "Rebekah, wake up," said Jacob. "Samuel is crying. I felt his head and he feels very warm to the touch." Rebekah sat straight up in the bed and quickly jumped onto the cold floor. She did not bother to put her slippers on. Jacob lit the kerosene lamp. Rebekah reached for her son, who rolled from side to side and whimpered. She felt his head, and the heat from his body seared through her. Samuel had never been ill except for slight stomach upsets, which were rare. "Please get some warm rags for me, Jacob, and also the vinegar and a bowl." She could not believe she failed to awake when her child cried. When she married Jacob, she rarely had interrupted sleep and now knew she slept sounder than she thought. Jacob returned with water in a pan and rags that were ready. Rebekah poured vinegar in and swirled the mixture. She then soaked a rag in it and placed it on Samuel's forehead. She wiped his burning cheeks with another cloth. "What can I do, Rebekah?" asked Jacob. She looked into his face. "We must pray he heals fast. Please lead us in prayer, Jacob." For the rest of the night, Rebekah continued to bathe her son with warm water and vinegar that Jacob replenished. Samuel grew calmer by the time the sun crept into the day. Jacob left to build the fire in the kitchen stove for Rebekah and to take care of chores. At her request, he brought the tin tub in from the back room. It was the one Rebekah used to bathe her son in. He set it down next to the stove to get it warm and then began to heat a large pan of water. He hurried to complete chores. Jacob prayed for his son. He had never seen a child look so ill. He went back into Samuel's room and saw that he slept. His wife sat on the chair and leaned onto the bed, sound asleep. He gently raised her up and smiled at her. "Maybe his illness will not be so serious. Come now. I have cafe ready for you in the kitchen." She smiled gratefully. Samuel's body was still warmer than she hoped, but he slept soundly. She and Jacob went into the kitchen. Jacob pulled the large pan from the fire and then went to the back porch, where he pumped another bucket of water. Rebekah started to reach for a pan to start breakfast. "You sit here," said Jacob. "I will cook breakfast this morning. I want you to drink this coffee and then eat something. You can rest when you are sure you feel good about Samuel." Rebekah was tired, but knew she would not sleep again until evening came. She realized Samuel was not out of the woods yet in his sudden illness. She recalled a story her mother told her once of Rebekah's illness, similar to Samuel's. She told her how she finally wrapped raw onion in a warm rag and tied it to the bottom of her feet. That was what drew the fever out, according to her mother. At the time, Rebekah laughed off the remedy, but according to Clara, it cured her of the fever. If it came to that, Rebekah would certainly use the same remedy. Before resorting to the onion method, she would make bone broth and encourage Samuel to drink it. Peppermint tea was something he liked. She discovered that one time when she sat down to have a cup for herself, he begged her for a sip when he was only 2 years old. She poured a little of it into his cup and added honey. He drank it with no problem. She began to brew the tea when she heard him stir. Rebekah made another mixture of the water and vinegar and pulled clean rags from the bag near the back door. She returned to her son and began the treatment again. He was not as restless, and though still warm, he was not as feverish as before. She assured Jacob their son would soon be well. He was reluctant to return to chores. They prayed another prayer before Jacob left them. "I am making you some peppermint tea today. It will be a treat," she told Samuel. "Remember how much you liked it that time I gave it to you." He nodded his head and attempted a smile which was interrupted by a cough from him. "Lie still, and I will bring you a cup of the tea." "I want a biscuit," said Samuel. Rebekah laughed. "You will get a biscuit, but drink this tea first. It will make you feel better. Dade brought your tub into the kitchen. In a little while I will give you a warm bath to make you feel gut soon." A day and night later, Rebekah knew Samuel was not recovering as she hoped. She and Jacob sat down in the sitting room for their evening prayers. Jacob knew his wife worried about Samuel. He was very concerned as well. But Jacob knew he must pray for strengthening of faith in God for both of them. After prayers were finished, he took Rebekah's hand in his own. "We must trust God to bring Samuel through this illness. He will be better tomorrow." Rebekah looked into her husband's face. "If it is God's will, perhaps we should take Samuel to town to see Dr. Merrifield." Jacob was inwardly alarmed. If Rebekah thought it necessary to seek care from the English doctor, she must be very worried. "I will go to your parents and seek their advice. Your mom has told stories of illnesses you and your brooders went through in childhood. Perhaps she will give us advice." Rebekah nodded and felt better. Her mother had recently recovered from a severe head cold but was healthy again. Rebekah had not told them of Samuel's illness. She knew her mother would believe she may have passed the illness to her grandson. That night she checked on Samuel before going to bed. Jacob had moved his small bed into their bedroom where they could watch him easier. Rebekah tuned in to every sound from Samuel. He coughed, but not as harshly as earlier. The next day, Clara Stoltzfus and her husband, Bishop Stoltzfus, arrived at the Stauffer home. Jacob had assured them of Samuel's condition, but not to be alarmed. When Clara picked up her grandson, he felt warmer than usual. Rebekah told her of her treatments. "Do you think we should ask Dr. Merrifield to examine him?" "It has stayed with him longer than usual for children his age," said Clara. "Before we make any decisions, let us pray together." The bishop agreed, and they bowed their heads while he prayed a lengthy prayer of praise for their God. He looked at his daughter and son-in-law. "Do not be concerned. Faith must take precedence in every decision. Dr. Merrifield is a gut doctor. I believe it is a good idea to see what he has to say about Samuel." Now that a plan was underway, the parents of Samuel sprung into action. Clara warmed the bricks for their feet in the buggy, while Daniel gathered extra blankets. Jacob hitched the enclosed buggy to their strongest horse and pulled up to the house where Rebekah stood waiting with Samuel. He took the child from her, and once settled for the ride to town, the horse began moving at a brisk pace. In the waiting room were two mothers with small children. One coughed often. The third patient was an elderly man. The receptionist told Rebekah and Jacob the doctor would see them soon. Dr. Merrifield greeted them warmly when he met them in the examining room. Rebekah explained all she had done, though his fever and cough persisted. Thoughts flew through her head about the sterile hospital where she delivered Samuel and later where she spent the last moments with Eli. After his accident, she brushed the memories away quickly and focused on the doctor's words. "Samuel is one of many children in our area with this malady. I will prescribe a medicine for him. You should see positive results in 24 hours or so." Dr. Merrifield noted the worried look in the mother's face. "Do not worry. This is not a serious illness. It is just one that is hanging on longer than usual among children. You came in plenty of time for him to get well soon." He handed the prescription to Jacob and told him there was a pharmacy at the end of the building they were in. "Make sure he drinks plenty of fluids." Rebekah and Jacob returned home with Samuel much more light-hearted than on the trip into town. "We must never forget faith and trust in our gut," said Jacob. Rebekah nestled against him, but not before wrapping the blankets around their feet tighter. The bricks had cooled down, but she did not feel the cold so much. Chapter 8. Thankful Hearts. The bishop came by their house late afternoon on the second day after the doctor's examination. "I came to check on the little one," he said. "Your mom wanted to come, but I told her she should wait another day. I have strict instructions to bring her details of his condition." Daniel looked up in surprise when Samuel bounded into the room. He breathed a silent prayer of thanksgiving at seeing him well again. "Do not get so rambunctious," said Rebekah. "You are better, but I do not want your fever to come back." She was more than thankful she had not had to resort to her mother's remedy of tying onions to the bottom of her son's feet. When Jacob followed the bishop outside, he mentioned the Englisher. "He has not been seen for a very long time, Jacob," said Daniel. "I do not believe we should worry about such things." Richard Blanton did not return to any Amish community. Instead, he met a deacon from a neighborhood church far away from the Stauffer family who convinced him to turn away from all negativity and resentment. Richard found the God he did not realize he searched for. Unknown to him, this gift came as a result of the Amish's forgiveness and prayers for him. The Byler's lives continued together in harmony with the passing seasons. The end. Thank you for listening. Here at PureRead, we aim to serve you, our dear readers and listeners, with good, clean Christian stories. You can be assured that any PureRead book you pick up will not only be hugely enjoyable, but free of any objectionable content. We are deeply thankful to you for choosing our books. Your support means that we can continue to provide stories like the one you have just listened to. To browse our range of clean and wholesome titles, go to pureread.com. Please like and subscribe to our channel. That way you'll be the first to hear when new stories arrive here for your enjoyment. God bless you, and thank you again for listening.